If archers crushed heavy cavalry based armies at Calais and Agincourt, why couldn't our archers, Indian archers, beat the cavalry based Turkic armies? Interesting question. This is how you learn how to think. You learn how to think from first principles. This is how you actually should study history, by asking such questions. Here's something that happened in the West. You have these wars between the British and the French, and certain kinds of military tactics and strategies were used there. And those worked brilliantly. So why couldn't we use such approaches here? We also had archers. We also faced invasions from foreigners, which is the Turks. So if those tactics worked there, why couldn't the same tactics be employed in India? Or did we employ those tactics? If we employed those tactics, why didn't they work? These are the questions, the kinds of questions you have to ask yourselves, and that's how you actually learn things. You learn causality, the cause and effect chain. Okay, so let's take this question. So, English archers, they defeated the French in Agincourt, in Calais, and so on, right? And it worked really well. So let's unpack this. These battles that used to take place between the English and the French in Europe, they typically were pitched battles. The two armed forces would come together, they'll find some place to fight, and then they'll fight. Sometimes it would be ambushes and whatnot, but generally there were systematic ways of fighting. You would have the cavalry, you would have the knights with their heavy armor, you would have archers, you would have foot soldiers, and so on, so forth, so on, so forth. You would have pikemen, you would have guys with swords, and so on. So every army had a certain set of components, and you knew what the other army is going to have. A certain number of knights who will charge with big lances and heavy armor on armored horses. You'll have pikesmen, you'll have infantry with swords, you'll have archers, and so on. Now, so these were not very mobile forces. They would not run around and wheel around at high speeds. They would essentially stand face to face, and you would deploy various components of your armed forces into the forward areas, into battle, phase by phase, based on various tactics and strategies. You would have flanking maneuvers, you would have people in reserves hidden somewhere in the forest who would come later, that sort of thing. You would try obviously to catch the opponent by surprise and defeat them. Now, the English, they had something called the long bow. L-O-N-G, long, B-O-W, bow, long bow. These long bows were typically around 6 feet long, the size of a guy. I mean, in those days, Europeans were much shorter, so taller than a man. 6 feet tall bows made of a wood called yew, Y-E-W. It's a kind of tree. They're very strong bows, and you needed to be really strong to be able to, to unleash the arrows from that. And you had pretty long arrows. So these were pretty innovative weapons. The French did not have this, and you could shoot arrows to much longer distances than with regular crossbows or whatever. Crossbows are these little weapons that you hold in your hands, and you have crossbow bolts, which are short arrows that you unleash from there. But longbows were like totally different weapons, and the French did not have this. So the English used longbows in, for example, the Battle of Agincourt, and it is said that they shot so many arrows it would darken the sky. And the arrows would obviously, take a parabolic kind of path and come back, and they would devastate the opponent. And the French did not have any answer to that. So this was kind of a technological innovation that the English came up with. Now these 6 feet long bows, they were not highly mobile. You needed to have, let's say, 500 guys, 1,000 guys, maybe 2,000 guys, 5,000 guys, whatever, who were experts in using this weapon. They would be stationed behind your troops, and they would fire from behind. And by doing so, they would essentially shepherd the enemy in certain directions. If you launch the arrows in such a way that they impact a certain part of the army, obviously the soldiers will move away. So you could essentially shepherd the enemy soldiers into killing zones, where your infantry and other parts of the army would dispatch them to the next world, essentially. So that's the kind of innovation the English came up with. And so that was the longbow, and they used to pluck the yew. That was the deal. So that is what the English used for a while, and that gave them a superb military advantage. And they were able to win multiple battles, essentially even decide the course of entire wars because of this technological innovation. So that's the longbow. That's what the English used. Now coming to India. In India, the battles that occurred between our defenders of those times, 1100, 1200, 1300 AD, which is essentially the Rajputs, what we now call the Rajputs, those kingdoms, against the Turks. The Turks were not like the French, who would come with these heavily armored knights with lances, who would be mounted on heavily armored horses, and they did not have pikesmen and all that. The Turks had very different battle strategies. They were very mobile. The Turks were nomads. They were very comfortable in horses. Of course, they would also have infantrymen. But their strategies were different. And we did not have those longbows. Our soldiers from that time, the Rajput armies, they would have obviously archers. They would also have swordsmen and all that. So it was not possible, because of the nature of the battles, to carry these gigantic bows into battle with guys who would be stationary, because the battles were highly mobile. And that's why it was not really something that would work against the Turks. The Turks were used to archery. They were very adept at, their tactics were to have archers on horseback. And they would, what's it called? The Parthian shot or whatever, which is something the Mongols also used, which is, shooting backwards. While your horse is charging this way, you'll shoot backwards and so on. So the Turks already were pretty proficient with archery. And because of the mobile nature of the Turkic war fighting, it would not really have worked against them. And if you had, let's say, 5,000 mobile archers, well, the Turks could use tactics where eventually the archers run out of arrows and then they will be ripe for the slaughter. So it would not work because of the nature of the battles that happened between the Rajputs and the Turks. So, it all has to be contextual. You have to see what kind of opponent you have, and you have to tailor your battle strategies and battle plans and tactics based on the nature of the opponent. If your opponent is not highly mobile, if they are used to pitched battles, if they put all their armed forces in one place and deploy them, phase by phase to the front, then you can decimate the rear using archers if they are not highly mobile, and you can break the ranks. But if they're already highly mobile, and in that case, it won't really work. So because of the different nature of war, could not really work in India.